At 12:30 a.m., DeKalb police responded to a person shot call at 4804 Ogden Corners Cove. Upon arrival, officers were immediately fired upon by an unknown suspect hiding between two residences. Officers returned fire. One of our officers was struck multiple times and was immediately evacuated and transported to a local area hospital for further medical treatment. After being evaluated by medical personnel at the hospital, he's going to be recovering from his injuries. Upon further investigation, it was determined that this whole incident stemmed from a domestic dispute between a boyfriend and girlfriend at the location, which escalated to the boyfriend shooting the female victim.
She knew something was wrong. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the 911 operator. "If anything happens to me," her words trailed off as shouting erupted in the background. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just an argument, it was a desperate plea. And then, the call went silent. When officers arrived at the house, everything seemed calm. The lights were off. The street was quiet. No sounds of struggle. They knocked. No answer. And so, they left. Hours later, another call would come in, this time from a different voice. The urgency was undeniable. A woman had been shot. And what unfolded next would leave an entire community shaken. This is the story of Aleka Simmons, a woman who tried to escape but never got the chance. Before we go any further, if you enjoy in-depth true crime storytelling and real-life cases that expose the chilling details behind these tragedies, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Watch HD. We bring you gripping stories that matter, ones that remind us of the thin line between love and danger. Now, let's get into it. Aleka Simmons was not just another statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a woman who had dreams, ambitions, and a life she was fighting to build. At 27 years old, she had already seen more than her fair share of struggles. Originally from Queens, New York, Aleka's childhood was anything but stable. Raised outside of her biological family, she had learned early on that the world wasn't always kind. But she was resilient. She worked multiple jobs, housekeeper, construction worker, even a manager at Neiman Marcus. She did what she had to do to survive. She was outspoken, confident, and determined to carve her own path. Social media showed glimpses of her bold personality. She wasn't shy about who she was. But behind the confidence was a woman longing for something stable, something real. And then, she met Otis Walker. Otis was 32. A man with a past. A past filled with violence, control, and a short temper. But like many toxic relationships, it didn't start that way. At first, it was passion. Excitement. A connection that seemed unbreakable. They were inseparable. Friends and family watched as their love burned brightly. But with intensity often comes danger. The arguments started slowly. Heated words turned into heated fights. And soon, the cycle became familiar. Anger, apologies, promises to change, and then another explosion. Those closest to Aleka saw the warning signs. They pleaded with her to leave. But she didn't. Some say it was love. Others say it was fear. Either way, she stayed. By the summer of 2019, things had escalated beyond control. The fights weren't just verbal anymore. Police had been called to their home more than once. And one of those calls resulted in Otis' arrest for domestic violence. For a moment, it seemed like Aleka would finally break free. But just one day after his arrest, she did something that would haunt those who loved her. She bailed him out. It was an act of forgiveness, or maybe an act of fear. Either way, it was the beginning of the end. On the night of July 31st, something felt off. Aleka had already made several hang-up calls to 911. And then, just past midnight, she made the final call. The one that should have saved her. Her voice was shaking. This is Aleka Simmons. If anything happens to me. The dispatcher listened as the argument escalated in the background. Aleka's voice grew more frantic. Are you threatening me? You're going to kill me. And then, silence. DeKalb County officers arrived at the home on Hodgdon Corners Cove. The house was dark. No signs of distress. No sounds. No movement. They knocked. They waited. And when nothing seemed out of the ordinary, they left. What if they had insisted on speaking to her? What if they had forced their way in? Would Aleka still be alive? Inside that house, the nightmare was just beginning. Otis' mother, Sharon Walker, had been asleep when she was woken up by a family member. The police had been there, they said. Something wasn't right. She walked to her son's room. Aleka was still there. The tension was thick. It wasn't just another argument. Something was different this time. Sharon tried to intervene. She told Aleka she would drive her home. She hoped it would defuse the situation, give them both space to cool off. But before she could grab her car keys, Otis shut the bedroom door. A single gunshot echoed through the house. Sharon ran back. What she saw would stay with her forever. Aleka was on the floor, blood soaking into the carpet. Her breathing was shallow. And Otis? He just stood there. I don't want to go back to jail, he muttered. Panic took over. Sharon grabbed the two children in the house and ran. She banged on a neighbor's door, screaming for help. The police were called again. But by the time Officer Derek Nunn and his team arrived, Otis was ready for them. From the darkness, gunfire erupted. 19 shots. 4 of them hit Officer Nunn. Chaos broke loose. Officers scrambled for cover. Otis disappeared into the woods, vanishing into the night. And inside that house, Aleka took her final breath. A young woman was dead. A police officer was fighting for his life. And a man with a violent history was on the run. But here's the question. Could this have been prevented? If the officers had handled that first call differently, if Aleka had been removed from the home that night, if someone had stepped in sooner, would things have ended the same way? Let us know what you think in the comments. As officers rushed to contain the chaos, Otis Walker vanished into the night. His escape wasn't just a desperate move. It was the beginning of one of the most intense manhunts in DeKalb County's history. Law enforcement wasted no time. Roadblocks were set up, helicopters hovered above, and K-9 units scoured the dense woods behind the crime scene. They knew one thing for certain. Walker was armed, dangerous, and had already shown he had no hesitation in pulling the trigger. The public was immediately warned. News stations flashed his face across their broadcasts, urging residents to stay inside and call authorities if they spotted anything unusual. But despite the massive search effort, the first night yielded nothing. Walker had disappeared. 4 days, investigators combed through every possible lead. Officers checked abandoned buildings, questioned known associates, and even monitored his mother's residence in case he tried to return. But he was always one step ahead. Until someone made a critical mistake. A few days into the search, detectives received a tip. Someone matching Walker's description had been spotted at a gas station just miles from the crime scene. Surveillance footage confirmed it. There he was. Wearing a hoodie, his face partially covered, but unmistakable. He wasn't just passing through. He was buying supplies. Food. Water. Enough to last him for days. This meant one thing. He was still in the area. Investigators now had a new strategy. Instead of spreading their search wider, they tightened their focus. Patrols increased in the neighborhoods surrounding the gas station. Officers knocked on doors, searching for anyone who might have seen him. And then, on August 8, 2019, 1 week after the murder, he made his final mistake. It was just another day for the clerk at a small convenience store in Lithonia. The sun was setting, the store was quiet, and then Walker walked in. He kept his head down, moving quickly toward the back of the store. But something about him seemed off. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact. Maybe it was the tension in his body, like he was expecting something to go wrong. The clerk recognized his face. Without hesitation, they pressed the silent alarm and pretended nothing was wrong. Minutes later, law enforcement swarmed the store. Guns drawn, they ordered him to the ground. For a moment, it seemed like he might resist. His hand twitched toward his waistband. But then, he surrendered. When they searched him, they found something chilling. A handwritten note. It was addressed to Officer Derek Nunn, the officer he had shot 4 times. "I'm sorry for what I did," it read. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just didn't want to go back to jail." But apologies couldn't undo what had already happened. Otis Walker was taken into custody without further incident. His week on the run was over. But for those affected by his actions, the nightmare was far from finished. With Walker finally behind bars, investigators could focus on one crucial task: building an airtight case. It didn't take long. The evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics matched the bullets fired at Officer Nunn to Walker's gun. Surveillance footage placed him at the scene. And then, there were the 911 calls, Aleka Simmons' own words, captured just moments before her death. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from Walker's own mother, Sharon. She recounted the horrifying moment she found Aleka wounded, the panic of fleeing the house, and the fear of knowing what her son had done. She had tried to stop it. She had tried to intervene. But in the end, it hadn't been enough. Prosecutors now had everything they needed. And when the trial began, there would be no doubt about what kind of man Otis Walker truly was. At this point, one question lingers: what makes someone cross the line from anger to murder? Was this a crime of passion? Or was it premeditated? Let us know what you think in the comments. When Otis Walker entered the courtroom for the first time, the atmosphere was heavy. The room was filled with Aleka Simmons' family, law enforcement officers, and community members who had been following the case closely. They weren't just there for justice. They were there to hear his explanation, if he had one at all. Walker's defense strategy was clear from the beginning. He would claim self-defense. He insisted that the events of August 1, 2019, had spiraled out of his control and that he had acted out of fear, not aggression. But his story had holes. His defense attorneys argued that he had shot Aleka in an act of desperation, that the argument had escalated, and that he felt physically threatened. But the prosecution wasted no time dismantling this claim. For one, there was Aleka's chilling 911 call. The jury listened as her voice trembled. "Are you threatening me? You're going to kill me." That wasn't the voice of an aggressor. That was the voice of a woman who knew she was in danger. Then came the forensic evidence. The bullet trajectory showed that Aleka had been shot at close range, directly in the chest. There were no defensive wounds on Walker. No signs of struggle that would suggest she attacked him first. It became painfully clear, this wasn't self-defense. This was execution. Walker's defense also attempted to downplay his actions after the shooting. His attorneys claimed that he hadn't meant to harm Officer Derek Nunn when he opened fire on police outside the house. Instead, they said, he had been trying to provoke officers into shooting him, an attempt at suicide by cop. But once again, the evidence told a different story. Ballistics experts testified that the shots Walker fired weren't aimed at the ground or in the air. They were targeted, deliberate. One round hit Officer Nunn's vest. Another struck his arm. 2 more bullets pierced his leg. These weren't warning shots. This was an attempt to kill. The prosecution presented a compelling argument. If Walker had truly wanted to be shot by police, why did he flee? Why did he escape into the woods instead of confronting officers? His claim didn't hold up. Throughout the trial, the jury heard from those closest to Aleka Simmons. Their words painted a heartbreaking picture of a woman who had tried, repeatedly, to leave an abusive relationship, only to be pulled back in each time. One of the most gut-wrenching testimonies came from Aleka's brother, Roland Simmons. He described his sister as a fighter, someone who had faced adversity her entire life but never lost her determination. But even she hadn't been able to escape this. Then came Sharon Walker, Otis' own mother. She sat before the court, visibly shaken, as she recounted the events of that night. The gunshot, the panic, the realization that her own son had just ended someone's life. She spoke of regret, of wishing she had done more, of feeling powerless as the situation spiraled beyond her control. And finally, Officer Derek Nunn took the stand. He described the sheer terror of being shot multiple times, the way his body collapsed, the sound of bullets whizzing past him, and the agonizing wait for backup to arrive, not knowing if he would make it out alive. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. After weeks of testimonies, forensic analysis, and closing arguments, the fate of Otis Walker was finally in the hands of the jury. It didn't take long. Less than 2 hours into deliberation, they reached a verdict. Guilty. On all charges. Malice murder. Felony murder. Aggravated assault. 3 counts of aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer. Possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. When the verdict was read, Aleka's family held onto each other, sobbing. Walker sat motionless. No reaction. No remorse. The judge wasted no time in delivering the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 65 years. This meant one thing: Otis Walker would never see the outside world again. As the trial concluded, many were left wondering, how did it get this far? Aleka had reached out for help. She had made multiple 911 calls. She had warned authorities. And yet, when officers arrived that night, they left. What if they had insisted on speaking with her directly? Would she still be alive? Many domestic violence experts weighed in on the case, highlighting the dangerous cycle of abuse. Victims often return to their abusers not because they want to, but because they feel trapped, afraid. This tragedy was more than just a crime. It was a failure of the system meant to protect people like Aleka Simmons. In your opinion, what could have been done differently to save Aleka Simmons? Should law enforcement have handled the situation another way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. As the courtroom doors closed and Otis Walker was led away to spend the rest of his life behind bars, investigators and reporters began digging deeper into his past. What they found was chilling, a pattern of violence and control that had been ignored for far too long. Walker's criminal record was no secret. He had multiple prior arrests, many of which stemmed from domestic disputes. But what hadn't been widely known was just how many warning signs had been overlooked. Aleka Simmons wasn't the first woman to experience his violent outbursts. Several women had previously filed reports against him, detailing physical altercations, threats, and even instances where they feared for their lives. One of Walker's ex-girlfriends, who chose to remain anonymous, came forward after the trial, revealing that she too had been a victim of his temper. She described moments where he would go from charming to terrifying in an instant. "He always made you feel like it was your fault," she said. "Like you were the one pushing him to act that way." Despite these reports, Walker had repeatedly been allowed to re-enter society with minimal consequences. Each time, the cycle repeated. As legal experts analyzed the case, a troubling realization emerged: Walker should never have been free that night. In the months leading up to Aleka's murder, he had been arrested for domestic battery. The court had issued a restraining order, yet it had not been enforced. Aleka had bailed him out, a decision that would ultimately seal her fate, but why had the system allowed her to? Some experts argue that domestic violence laws need to be stricter, especially in cases involving repeat offenders. Others believe there should be mandatory interventions, counseling, electronic monitoring, or extended holding periods, to prevent victims from feeling pressured into helping their abusers regain their freedom. But one thing is clear: Aleka's death was preventable. If action had been taken earlier, if the justice system had intervened more aggressively, if law enforcement had pushed further during that fateful 911 call, things might have been different. The tragedy of August 1, 2019, didn't just claim one life. It left permanent scars on everyone involved. Aleka's family continues to struggle with the loss, forced to live with the knowledge that she spent her final moments in fear, calling for help that never truly arrived. Officer Derek Nunn, the DeKalb County officer who was shot 4 times, survived, but his life would never be the same. His injuries required multiple surgeries, months of rehabilitation, and a long road to recovery. Though he eventually returned to duty, the trauma of that night lingers. Even Walker's own family was left shattered. His mother, Sharon Walker, who had unknowingly been a witness to the crime, spoke publicly about the pain of seeing her son become a murderer. "I tried to stop him," she said. "I should have done more." She now advocates for stronger domestic violence interventions, hoping that her family's tragedy can serve as a lesson to others. The case of Aleka Simmons is more than just a true crime story. It's a warning. A reminder of the dangers of ignoring red flags. A case study in the failures of a system that should have protected her but didn't. Domestic violence is one of the most underreported crimes, and many victims never make it out. Fear, manipulation, financial dependence, these factors often keep them trapped. Aleka's story is proof that waiting too long to leave can have deadly consequences. But it doesn't have to end this way for others. There are resources available for those experiencing domestic violence. Organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline and local shelters provide support, legal guidance, and emergency assistance to help victims escape before it's too late. If you or someone you know is in an abusive situation, don't wait. Don't second guess. Reach out. Ask for help. Take the first step. Because for too many, that first step never comes soon enough. This case raises an important question. How do we fix a system that allows dangerous individuals to slip through the cracks? Should there be stricter laws on repeat offenders? Should restraining orders come with automatic enforcement measures? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this case eye-opening, subscribe to True Crime Watch HD for more real-life stories that uncover the hard truths behind crime and justice. This was the case of Aleka Simmons, a woman who should still be here today. Her story may have ended, but the lessons from it must live on.